All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to People of Color Beyond Faith. We are here today to talk about Ferguson and beyond. And all right. Sorry about that. Ferguson and beyond. And we wanted to bring this to you from a secular perspective. We being members of this community, especially those of us that are pro-social justice, there are some issues that we wanted to talk about, and also we wanted to encourage the people that are out there, actually on the field and, out here protesting, out here donating in all of these. We wanted to encourage you guys, but also we wanted to talk about what our role as secularists are in this movement, this mass movement, this groundswell of protests happening around this country. So before I get started, I wanted to introduce my guests. We have Donald Wright, the author of The Only Thing I'll Pray Is Let My People Go. And he's here with us today. And he's also the president of Houston Black Non-Believers. So for those of you out there in the Houston area, contact Donald Wright. And they have a group out there. They're doing really well, and they would love to see you. We also have Jenn Taylor from Black Atheists of Philadelphia, and she's joining us today. We have Raina Rhoades from Chocolate City Skeptics, and that's in the DMV area, and she's with us. And we have Dr. Sikivu Hutchinson with us. She's from Los Angeles, and she runs Black Skeptics Group, specifically Black Skeptics LA. So I would like to thank them all for joining us today. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome.
Hey.
Morning.
Hello. Thank you very much. Just a correction. I'm not acting as president right now of
Yes,
Houston
sir.
Black Non-Believers, but I'm certainly involved with the group. So we're
Excellent.
looking forward to a brand new year.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And I wanted to start this town hall out with a quote from Frantz Fanon, and it simply says, "We revolt simply because, for many reasons, we can no longer breathe." And this is a fact that I'm going to bring to you guys. Every 28 hours, a black man, woman, or child is murdered by police or vigilante law enforcement. An estimate of 25.1% of black women live in poverty. This is higher than any other ethnic groups. The average life expectancy for a black transgender woman is 35 years. And so it's really important for you all to understand what we're faced with, the dire circumstances there. And I'm pretty sure many of you all have heard the mantra that's been, stated on many occasions, Black Lives Matter. And I wanted to make sure you all understood where that came from. That was created by Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. And they created this right after Trayvon was murdered. And so I just want to make sure you guys give credit where it's due. They created that as a call to action to bring attention to the murders of black men, women, children, trans people. And so it's important that we are inclusive and that we talk about these issues that are happening. And over the past several days, especially after the verdict, the grand jury deciding that the officer, Pantaleo, that murdered Eric Garner would not be brought to trial. Again, we already had the protests from Ferguson, and earlier, about a week before, is when we found out that Darren Wilson wouldn't be charged. So now Darren Wilson wasn't charged, Officer Pantaleo wasn't charged, and I'm sure you all have seen the videos and the pictures of the groundswell of mass protests happening across the United States. In addition to that, we have people marching for us in other countries. I know I posted some pictures from India, from England, from the Dutch, and also Tokyo, and there's a number of other places, but I only posted a few. But what struck me was a tweet by a young woman, and she was talking about how her grandmother was in tears right after the grand jury decided not to indict Officer Pantaleo. And she said her grandmother was in tears because she said that they marched so that we wouldn't have to. And I just wanted to talk to the panel and speak with them and just ask them, especially, we'll start with Donald. And Donald, as one of our senior people in this community, I mean, what are your feelings about what has happened, about the fact that we're out here marching again?
Well, once again, we are experiencing a surge of basically police authorized peers, and the way in which this is transpiring is very alarming. But I think the most important thing is for us to be aware of where this type of activity comes from. And so, as part of my increased awareness over the past few years, I stand on this statement that America is basically the United States is a country that's struggling with three issues, and that is capitalism, racism, white supremacy, and religion. And so most of everything that we deal with in terms of inhumane treatments or injustice can probably be categorized under those one of those three institutions, I would call it. And so the racism that you see that's practiced by the police department is more so of a protection of our capitalist system, and police in its significance has taken on a new definition. And so I know when I was growing up, it weren't that many, any of my black friends that was talking about being a police officer, but I heard it on television and heard it from some white friends, uh, and that is wanting to be a police officer meant something to the community. And but I think during that time, and so I grew up in the '60s. The police weren't part of the military, and they weren't part of this severe protection of the establishment, or actually protection of the capitalist elites. So now they have been given authority to do this overwhelming protection. And so I think one of the things that's very important to me is um, not to fear the police.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's okay. I think you should respect what they do and what the job they're supposed to do. But what they are doing now is basically encouraging us to fear them. And I am so hurt to have to experience this in 2014 in terms of how this has really affected our society. And I think it's not to be too pessimistic, but it just going to get worse, because they have been given a free range in terms of their conduct and the way they can treat people, particularly black people. And we have to be aware of where this comes from and who they are actually serving, because saying police department is they are supposed to protect and serve, that's a wrong description of their duties, because they don't protect and serve black people. And so I wouldn't consider them to be someone that's going to protect and serve me. So I think they should be just classified as the enforcers, not law enforcement, but just call them the enforcers, and that will give you a better clarity in terms of who they are and what they are capable of doing, and the way they can react to any small or minor violation or anything that they consider that might trigger their interest, where they can invoke their authority and power. We should all be concerned about that.
Exactly, exactly. And what about yourself, Dr. Hutchinson? What are your thoughts about the fact that we're out here marching yet again? And I
Yet
saw that
again.
you took your daughter out with you, so she's learning early and young.
Absolutely. I thought it was critically important to take her and to make her aware of the whole context of paramilitary violence and criminalization of youth of color, because that was how I was initiated into the resistance struggle in the late 1970s. And I've written about this extensively, where I was taken to a protest and a mass speak out by my father in 1979 after the murder of an African-American woman named Eula Love at her Watts home by 2 police officers. And this really galvanized the community, back into pushing back on a mass level, on an organized level, against state violence. So as many of you know, LA has had a generations-long history of pushing back against state violence, of linking this issue of the dehumanization, the white supremacist dehumanization of black bodies to the occupation, the military occupation of our communities. So, for example, in the late 1960s, the whole SWAT configuration of the LAPD arose as a specific response to the Black Panther Party, where you saw, the deracination of the Black Panther Party, not only on the part of the federal government vis-a-vis COINTELPRO, but also in terms of the local police department apparatus. So we've always been steeped in this extremely violent and deracinating culture of militarization. Circling back to this issue of trying to uplift young people in their struggle against state violence, one of the things that that I've been on point about consistently is this issue of the detention and the push out of young people of color, specifically African American young people in our schools. I would say that there's not a week that goes by when I don't see young black boys in our dean's offices in handcuffs. And so these are the issues that the millennials are pushing to the fore. They're doing it intersectionally, and thank you, Kim, for bringing up the issue of the impact that state violence and criminalization has on the bodies of queer and transgender youth, because these are under the radar issues when it comes to a humanist context, that we are not seeing this framed intersectionally vis-a-vis humanist secular struggle and the way in which we can impact our apartheid that's happening here and now in the so-called post-racial, colorblind, meritocratic context in our schools. So again, LA has this long history. This is not new. Kim was here this past summer, when Ezell Ford, young African-American male, was brutally shot down, murdered, executed by the LAPD. We just had yet another shooting by a man who allegedly had a knife on Hollywood Boulevard, and that's where we had the protest yesterday. So we're at the epicenter of state violence, and it's important to be conscious that there is this long tradition of pushing back and looking at redress, not only in terms of public policy, but in terms of trying to deconstruct the white supremacist apparatus that exists in our schools and in our communities.
Excellent, excellent. And I will turn to Raina, because Raina is a millennial. And I wanted to make sure that, you all understood that, because I believe that her perspective will differ just a little bit. So, Raina, did you want to speak on that? About the fact that we're still marching now. And 50 years ago, it's been 50 years. They celebrated the 50th anniversary not too long ago of the March on Washington. And the fact that we're out here marching now and your generation is at the forefront of it.
Yeah, it's, I grew up in a community that was supposed to be patterned as some sort of haven for biracial, or interracial couples. And so, I grew up with a lot of this post-racial nonsense. And, over time, of course, I've had to, wake up to the reality of race in this country. And, it doesn't, I think, it doesn't surprise me now, where I am in my thinking now, but I certainly wouldn't have imagined this, as I was coming up, that we would still have to deal with these issues. I'm really happy to see that, people in my generation, though, are stepping up.
Whoops, we can't hear you, Raina.
I think it's important that we all get out there. You can't hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, you're correct. It is important that you all get out there. Go ahead.
So there's a lot of distortion in the line. But basically, I was saying that I grew up in a community that was sort of supposed to be a a community that was a safe haven for interracial couples. And so I grew up with a lot of this interracial, or this post-racial rather, belief. And of course, I've since, going to college, I went to an HBCU, and I learned about history, and there were
We lost her audio.
Oh, yeah, I think we lost her audio. All right, Raina, sorry. We lost your audio. We can't hear you.
Okay, I don't know what's
There
going
you go.
on.
Now we hear you again.
Okay, I don't know what's going on, so I'm probably just gonna pass the mic.
Okay. All right, Jenn, what are your thoughts on the fact that we're out here marching again for the same, rights that we were allegedly given during the civil rights era, that phase of the civil rights era, the fact that, our parents, our grandparents, so on and so forth, actually marched basically to make a better world for the rest of us, and just thinking about their utter disappointment in the fact that we're starting basically behind where we originally started in the 50s and 60s. We've lost all of that and some. And now we're out here marching again. And so, what are your thoughts about the older generation that actually were the pioneers and whose shoulders we stand on? The fact that they're sitting here and they're watching us go through the same things that they fought against.
First of all, I'd like to say I would like to offer my condolences to the family of those wrongfully slain people of color. And also, I also like to say that we probably never stopped marching. There's been injustice, for as long as I can remember. I'm in the 70s. I saw a lot of things growing up, and we should have never stopped marching. We should have never stopped speaking out. I didn't grow up in a home where my parents encouraged, going out to protest of that sort. But in today here and now, I do support my efforts. I think we're so behind the ball, and we should have continued. And I don't think until this injustice has been. I'm just outraged. Just from the secular community perspective, I'm just outraged at
more of us speaking out about this.
Exactly.
Exactly, and we'll get to that. And I want people to actually go and look up a specific Supreme Court case. It was Los Angeles versus Adolph Lyons. And again, that's Los Angeles versus Adolph Lyons. And it was regarding the police chokehold. And Thurgood Marshall blasted that decision as well. So this is not anything new, but I want you all to go and do some research to understand the history of.
So let me chime in on that, Kim, because you're invoking LA, and LA has this long draconian history with the chokehold. And I remember, if we're talking about the link between becoming aware and becoming educated and enfranchised as a young person, and then actualizing that in your adulthood. I remember in the 1970s where you had Daryl Gates, who was more or less the Bull Connor of the West Coast. The face of white supremacy, may as well have had like a grand dragon, crown on his head. And he was the one who presided over the LAPD, for many decades. Certainly when I was in elementary school, he was more or less, the face of white supremacist violence. A Jim Crow type apartheid violence transplanted into the so-called sunny, more enlightened West. And so he made this infamous statement after an African-American male died from a chokehold and said, well, the reason why, all these, black people are dying from chokeholds is because their veins do not open up similar to normal people's veins. He said that.
Oh, yeah, wow.
So that was one of the defining statements of the era in terms of really encapsulating the type of apparatus that we were dealing with vis-a-vis the LAPD's reign. And so obviously over the past few decades, because the LAPD was under a consent decree, stemming from a lot of police misconduct, brutality and excess force in the 1990s. It was under a consent decree. There was a regime change. They implemented all of these, community policing policies and procedures. But, here we are, 21st century, with all of these histories, having gone down, and we're still in this state of crisis and dehumanization. So I think that opens up another question that, many activists, organizers, and thinkers are posing. This gap between the implementation of, supposedly more culturally responsive, more, community-oriented policies and the actual execution of those policies. The fact that we have a grand jury convened, twice to try and avenge the injustice of, the brutal, savage murders of black males. We have this legal apparatus that exists, but we still can't get justice. We're still in a state where lynch mobs, rule in our communities.
Exactly. And if people weren't aware, look at the irony of the situation. They said had there been cameras on the police officer when Mike Brown was murdered, that would have told the story. But yet, on the other hand, there was a video taken with Eric Garner's, viewed by millions of people, and yet we were told not to believe our lying eyes. The camera meant nothing. And incidentally, the gentleman that took the video is the only one that's been charged in the whole situation.
Right.
So I just find all of that just absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. And, you have people out here who think that having cameras on the police would stop a lot of this. And the Eric Garner case, that tells us that the cameras mean nothing. Because it's policies that need to be changed in order to truly indict a cop. But that's something else. We could talk about that a little bit later. Because again, it's interesting because the UN, the United Nations, even condemned America's systemic racism and state violence, our police practices. And there was an incident in Arizona in which an officer murdered a black man, but before calling the ambulance or calling for backup, he texted his union rep. And even with the case of Tamir Rice in Ohio, he refused to give the gentleman, the young boy, CPR. And so I'm looking at all of this and I'm trying to understand what's happening. You know, you have these people out here, championing this trope that we live in a post-racial America and that we are colorblind. And unfortunately, as being a member of the secular community or the atheist community, we hear a lot of that particular rhetoric. And what's even more disturbing to me is the lack of response from the atheist community. And there are some people that have been out here, you know, I mentioned them on the show. I was talking about James Croft, Chris Hall, Aron Ra did a show about, Black Lives Matter. Of course, we have Greta and PZ and a number of other people. But as a whole, we have not seen any real activism or any real response. As a matter of fact, the silence has been stunning by white atheists in this community. And interestingly enough, also the black atheists. I believe the Black Atheist Group that's headed by Mario Stanton, I believe they put up the link on a couple of occasions about the fund where you can send money in to help with what's happening down in Ferguson and even just around, the United States. But again, even in the black atheist community, the silence is absolutely stunning. And Donald, what is your take on that?
I lost you, Kim.
Oh, that's okay. I said, what is your take on the fact that we have not had a lot of response from the atheist community, neither the white atheist community nor the black atheist community? Especially the black atheist community. They, many of them, I would hope, still identify as black, and
negligible.
Right. And what I'm trying to get some people to understand is going to the different atheist conferences and conventions to speak about the so-called pathology of the black community is not real activism, especially those that claim that they want to come back into the community and work in the community, but you have yet to go back to the community to do anything. You believe that your activism is just merely going to atheist conferences and speaking to pretty much a lily white audience. And so I guess my question to you, Donald, is what is your take on the lack of response from both white and black atheists in this community?
Well, let me first let me bring something to the table regarding historical violence in this country, and I think one of the things that became so apparent, that is becoming more apparent to me, is this country thrives on violence, and so I had the opportunity to reflect on, as we were talking about the marching during the '60s and all that. If you recall the many opportunities when marchers were confronted by police, how they were confronted with violence. Now, water hoses and beatings and all those things. And so what we're seeing is that it's everything about this particular country allows things to progress, to me, right along with technology. So the physical beatings and the water hoses has been moved into a contemporary state of more guns and more military style weapons and those type of things. So they have more of those at their access. So the violence now is not going to be water hoses. They're going to be AK-47s possibly. So that's one of the things that I think most of us don't want to reflect on, is that the violence in this country is basically demonstrated from a wide range of activities in the way in which our military is utilized, and so our administration, our current administration, presidential administration, utilizing drones and killing of innocent people across the world. These things are accepted by a lot of Americans, both secular and non-secular. So the violence that we convey seems to be okay with a lot of people. And so in order to address the issue about the response of white non-believers or black non-believers, I want to share something that I had a conversation with some of the guys at the barbershop a few days ago. And so when I'm trying to talk about these particular events with what happened in Ferguson in New York, by the response from some of these brothers, and some of these brothers are in their 20s, and the first thing they want to do is blame Brown and Eric, and they can come up with reasons to justify that our youth are contributing to this treatment by police because of they wearing saggy pants or the hip hop and the language and all these things that encourages treatment from the police as such. So in other words, we're not going to evaluate or criticize the police. We're just going to criticize our young black people for causing these things to happen. Now, I think one of the things about that is that might be the consensus in terms of why we're not getting response from white atheists, black atheists, because people are not seeing this as being a police problem, and that's discouraging to me. So, but I'm not shocked by white atheists not coming out. I mean, from my experience in this community, I don't see the white atheists addressing racism at all. I don't think they're interested in it. So what happens here is that they fall in line with the general white people in this country that racism doesn't exist anymore and we don't have to deal with it. So that's not something we need to be concerned about. So why talk about it? But the advent of black atheists dealing with this too challenges their perspective in terms of what is a kind of a foundational problem of what's occurring in this country, and not being able to take the real facts and evaluate what's contributing to these things. I think that's a core of why you just don't hear a whole lot of sentiment in terms of being on the side of fighting for justice. And when I was looking at this, I was not concerned about whether Michael Brown or Dorian Johnson stole anything from that store. I was only concerned about the fact that his life was taken unnecessarily and unjustified. So that's why I became outraged. And so I looked at it from a human perspective, which continues to surprise me about a humanist community that don't react the same way. And we're just going to have to keep fighting and promoting and talking about this, being hopeful that we change the dynamics in terms of how the conversation is presented. So humanism, it's almost like the secular community can look at humanism entirely different when it involves black people and when racism is demonstrated.
Oh, I definitely agree. Dr. Hutchinson, your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on what Donald was saying, let's look at the really egregious and toxic response that we got when we did Moving Social Justice. So there are a number of articles that were written to utterly decry and to assail our even proposing that social justice had some type of, impact on the ways in which people of color are experiencing hyper-religiosity and segregation in their communities. And so, the consistent pushback that we got from predominantly white atheists, and I'm quite sure there were some atheists of color who were in the fray as well, was that this is mission drift, that the real issue is church-state separation and their very white supremacist perverted version, of science education and science literacy, and that we're muddying the waters, in essence. And we've gotten this time and time again, from the same chorus of dude bros and, Dawkins aligned, fanatics that want to try and discredit the critical resistance of atheists and humanists of color that don't just date from 2010, but date all the way back to the early 20th century and to a lesser extent the late 19th century with Frederick Douglass. I mean, these are critiques that we have waged time and again when there was no language and terminology to even configure this notion of intersectionality. We were, the original folk, pushing for intersectionality because that, to paraphrase what Debbie Goddard said during our conference, is the crux of our lives. And so, this whole notion that if we are somehow talking about state violence, if we're talking about militarization in schools, if we're talking about the ways in which queer and transgender, black and brown youth are disproportionately suspended, expelled, pushed out, OT'd, from these resegregated schools, that somehow, perverts and undermines, the atheist agenda.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of toxic thing that we're going to have to organize more strategically against because, as we point out in various forums, in books and articles, the reason why, the Black church apparatus is so dominant and so strong in our communities is precisely because of this nexus, of capitalism and heterosexism and patriarchy and, economic apartheid and educational apartheid. It's precisely because our schools, decades after Brown v. Board supposedly consecrated integration, as the secular value, that our schools are far more resegregated than they were in the 1950s. And this is a reality that we're living, that's in our bloodstream. So this whole proposition, that atheism and humanism, cannot quote unquote accommodate, social justice is racist and heterosexist and, anti-woman to the core. And we should continue to articulate that, not just in terms of, the online venues, but in terms of our on the ground organizing.
Exactly. I 100% agree, and it is about the language. And well, that's one factor in that whole equation there. And I just feel that we're doing the right thing by taking control of the narrative and putting it out there and challenging the white atheist community at large, and even some of the atheists of color with some of the tropes that they try to display or talk about or point at black community, saying that this is a black issue. And I guess I would ask Raina if she wanted to, add something to this particular part of the conversation.
Yeah, I just want to say, that, often we find people in the Black atheist community who like to talk about the church and how, religious faith, has made Black communities complacent, with the issues that are going on in our communities and what have you. But I have to say that I find a lot of Black atheists pretty complacent with a lot of the things that are going on in the world right now. And They have, you know, they have joined the atheist humanist community, and now as members of the enlightened, somehow they no longer are impacted by these issues. And I find that that's, that's troubling. It's dangerous. And it's delusional, frankly. I mean, we are communities under siege. You know what I mean? And we need to do better. We need to do
Exactly.
better.
Exactly. And what has me concerned is even white Christians are taking a stand against the systemic racism in this country. White Christians and the black Christians as well, because a lot of churches today across the country, they're going to do a die-in. They're going to walk out and interrupt traffic in their areas and get out there and let everybody know that Black Lives Matter, and they've been protesting. And what's interesting is throughout Black radical humanist tradition, we have always been on the forefront, at least, part of the key players for this, for situations such as this. And, although, we're doing our part with moving social justice, we are active, we do have these conversations. Again, I'm still a little disappointed, especially with a lot of the atheists of color in this community. And Jenn had, brought that up a little bit in her last response. Jenn, did you want to expound on this, add to the conversation here? And take yourself off mute, please.
Yes. Can you hear me? I hope.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. All right. You can't see me, but you can hear me. I'm here. Okay. All right. I'm sick. I am angry. I can't breathe. I mean, let's put up a billboard about that. Although
Right.
I appreciate our allies, and I mean, I'm just beginning to believe that the greater secular community does not care and does not want to lose its fan base donations, and I mean, of its anti-humanistic members. I mean, how about that for mission drift? I mean, I see these conferences. I mean, they want you to spend hundreds of dollars or thousands to attend these things. I challenge people out there. Help the people that are out there in the field. Send water, send food, send clothing. Help the people that are out there working on what's real. We talk about, in the atheist community about the fantasy of gods and things of that sort, and we bash religious people, but this is the time where you really know where you stand in this community, where we stand in this community. And I don't see people standing up, and I'm outraged by it. And I'm just saying that if you have an organization, you run an organization that does not support true humanism for everyone, including people of color, you will not see a dime of my money. You will not see me at your conferences. What are we going to do as a secular community? I'm open to suggestions. Go ahead, Donald. I'm sorry.
I think the challenge to the secular community is basically it's going to be an ongoing message to change the conversation, and that's obviously that's what we're trying to do with this campaign.
Yes.
People of color beyond faith. So if we continue to encourage the conversation to be more inclusive and from a broader scope of social justice, then we have to allow people to hear it. And my attitude is if you have to keep repeating it, then just do that. And at some point, you just got to continue have the focus that we want to see some changes made, and we want to see real life changes. And the idea in which we're going to involve the secular communities, I just don't know how long that's going to take. I would think that we wouldn't have to demonstrate or give a concerted effort to try to motivate them to want to be involved in this issue.
Right.
But it is a rather uh, telling episode of what it means to convince people about uh, where the problems are.
Right.
And I think the conversation that you can have with people realizing what is really challenging now. I mean, I have a difficult time trying to help black people see that racism exists.
Mm.
So trying to convince white people, it's. I mean, they're going to be the last ones that want to get rid of this. So when we're talking about specific events, and so when we get back to the Ferguson situation and then what happened in New York, um, it's interesting that there's two things here. And let me look at the issue in New York first, and that is, why did he have to attack the brother? What was taking place for him to have to attack the brother? I mean, so I'm looking at it first, looking at the video and just looking at what was taking place during the video. So what provoked the cop to have to attack the brother? That's the question I'd like to have answered. And then if that can't be described, I guess in our legal system to explain his justification, then he should be indicted. He should be put in prison and let the brothers that are there deal with him. Because apparently that's what they're trying to prevent. They don't want cops going to prison, apparently. So because they might experience some real violence in there. I don't know. I think that might be what they try to do systematically, is just keep cops out of prison. But the evidence that came forth in terms of the information for the situation in Ferguson, my question is, so Doran was right there, and so his testimony didn't matter, apparently. Eyewitness to the event, and sure, he could have fabricated some information, but cops and grand jury and prosecutors fabricate information too. So who's going to be the ones that can really determine what the real facts are, so that we can move our society into a just society? So these are the kind of things that we have to talk about, and we can't be shy about it, and trying to make to take what we see as being just systematic, and now they are authorized to do whatever they choose when they choose to do it, and they know that they are being supported by a much larger, in terms of power, they are being supported by a power that we as just citizens can't do anything about, and that's a scary state to have to live in a country like this.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And personally,
I just want to say, oh, okay, sorry.
no, go ahead, Raina.
I just wanted to say that, like, one of the things that I think is so infuriating about dealing with the secular community is, you hear a lot about people in this community, challenging religious authority, and you hear, of course, everyone likes to use the logical fallacies in this community, as Debbie said. We know all of the Latin names for all the logical fallacies, therefore we're enlightened. But we challenge authority a lot. But what's what's troubled me in a lot of these conversations that I've seen in the secular community is there's a lack of willingness to challenge the authority of the legal system, of law enforcement, of just in general. They're not willing to turn that skeptical lens onto these so-called secular institutions. And that's really disappointing for a community that's supposed to pride itself on free thinking and challenging the authority.
Yeah.
We need to challenge authorities outside of the religious scope. We have to broaden our perspective, and remember that the law is not inviolable. The law is what we say the law is.
Yeah.
If we decide to change the law, we can change the law.
Yeah. So, my response to that, Raina, is that, we have to contextualize their perspective vis-a-vis the kinds of communities that they're coming from, that their context is an extremely white, extremely hierarchical, extremely elitist, even if we're talking about, yes, poor, working class, relatively disenfranchised white folk. So, there have been numerous studies that indicate that white males in the job market, and this was specifically done in New York by a Princeton researcher, white males in the job market with criminal records are more likely to be hired than black males with no criminal records, with high school diplomas and even college degrees. Numerous studies coming out, from the U.S. 2010 survey, Brown University researchers, that documented that we are living in an increasing state of residential apartheid, when it comes to, say, upper middle class, affluent African Americans and Latinos being able to gain purchase into white enclaves, be they, working class or other. The working class white people are living in more enfranchised areas with more resources, more assets, and more capital, ultimately, than our affluent African American and Latino homeowners. So these are the realities. Right. These are, the overarching geopolitical context, that white atheists and humanists, and I don't care if they're liberal, progressive, tree-hugging, critically conscious in their minds, anti-racist, these are the contexts that they're coming from. So we have to put it in that perspective that, they're not going to push back against a regime of power that humanizes them and that enfranchises their children.
Exactly. And what I wanted to, one last, because I know Dr. Hutchinson has to leave.
Yeah, I'll stay on for another 15 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask.
We got started late, so I'm sorry.
There you go. Yeah. The question that I have for you, and this is for everybody, but we'll start with Dr. Hutchinson here. Do you or do you not find it ironic or maybe profound that the Obama administration is coming to an end, and now we have this groundswell of protests by people of color as well as whites across this country, and we are being supported, motivated, and encouraged by people in other countries because, as I've stated before, they look up to us. If they see us fighting, it gives them hope that their fight for liberation and justice, has merit. But do you find, what are your thoughts on the fact that this is the Obama administration, it's the ending of it, and now we have this, mass protest happening across the country?
Yeah, I think that most of us have critiqued the comatose state that the Obama administration has been in, when it comes to seriously redressing racial disenfranchisement, and we're not even talking about white supremacy, we'll just say racial disenfranchisement and institutional racism in this country. And Obama is really acting as a result of the groundswell that we've been talking about. His impetus is the critical resistance, that's happening in our jails, in our juvenile facilities, on the ground, in schools, against this, extremely savage, barbarian grand jury non-indictment. That's why they're acting. So yes, it is ironic, and I think that we need to brace ourselves, for even more fascist tidings, as we see, the ascent of the GOP dominated House, that we're really going to have to hit the ground running as a result of the potential fallback and blowback against us, against civil rights, social justice, and gender justice that's going to be waged by that draconian regime.
Excellent. Jenn, would you like to join in on that? You have to unmute yourself, Jenn.
Yeah, all kinds of technical problems over here today. Oh my goodness. I would just like to say, where have these people been? Oh my goodness. Yes, I do find it ironic. That's it.
Oh, okay. What about you, Raina?
Like Raina's muted also.
Yeah, Raina, unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Oh, okay. I thought Jenn was talking first. I'm sorry. Um, as far as the whole Obama thing. Okay, so, I mean, I guess I really never expected Obama to really do much in terms of race relations, and after seeing all of those, the sort of resurgence of all of these like white supremacist groups and things like that. I guess I can't really say that I'm surprised, but yeah, I guess it is somewhat ironic that that would all be going on at this time in his presidency. But I'm glad to see that it's happening. I didn't think it would happen now, but I'm glad to see that it's happening. So.
Excellent. And what about yourself, Donald?
Well, I can't state that I'm glad to see it happen, because I'm disappointed in this type of activity, that we're still having to deal with this at this point in our history. I guess, but it is good that he's being confronted with something probably a lot more real to him, maybe. I did observe that when he gave his statement after the Ferguson decision, I was very concerned based on the fact that he was showed. I was a little bit. I guess I was a little. Was he just an individual that has no compassion for black people, or is he a president that's really afraid of what this system is and what could happen to him if he challenged this particular status? So I'm not sure what he's really trying to convey. Is he just being just inconsiderate and non-compassionate, or is he just projecting fear regarding if he does some things that we know he should do, then he might be subject to some severe punishment himself. And I think the other side of it too is that from what this is a great opportunity in terms of people that have was originally criticizing the type of administration he was going to bring forth. I think it's another one of those opportunities to say, "See, I told you." And the honest not doing should just be more compelling now. And I think we should be open and excited to be able to give honest criticism of these people. And he shouldn't be given a pass just because he's black. And that, particularly in a situation where he hasn't demonstrated any policies or promoted any policies that shows any interest in the progression of black people in this country. So, those facts should be laid out on the table for everybody to see. And here's another opportunity for a man of such great power to do good, and he's not going to take advantage of this. And his legacy is going to be ruined. But as far as I'm concerned, he has no legacy anyway. So that's the way I evaluated the type of person or the type of administration he was going to bring in the very beginning. So I'm not surprised, just disappointed.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. And just looking at this situation and look at what's happening, throughout the country, I hope that a number of issues, well, these particular issues that I'm going to list, I hope that people take this into consideration as they continue this dialogue. And basically, I feel that we need to be discussing about economic democracy of communities of color, in addition to community control of the police, having an oversight of the police departments. And even, when we talk about the Black Panthers, they were created to police our own communities and to give legal advice to let people know what, the police had authority to do or not to do. We need to challenge the media even more because of a lot of the language that they're putting out there, a lot of the images. The media definitely needs to be challenged, and we need to start divesting from a lot of the stuff that we invest in this country. Tony, one of the members of Black Skeptics LA, she was saying it's time for the world to go South Africa on America with sanctions, boycotts, and divestments. And we also need to challenge these local municipalities and cities and towns, challenge and force them to change their budget priorities. In addition to that, we need to start working on creating political organizing for high schoolers and for people in the community as well. And then also we need to start asking about the leadership of allegedly anti-racist organizations that have been utterly ineffective compared to their earlier counterparts. And I believe that this all needs to be a part of the conversation. What say you, Dr. Hutchinson?
I'm sorry, what was the last statement?
The last statement was saying that, questioning the leadership of allegedly anti-racist organizations that have been utterly ineffective compared to their earlier counterparts.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree. And just to circle back to a theme that you invoked early on, that we really, particularly as educators, particularly as those, who are organizing youth, that deal with youth on a day-to-day basis, have to confront this disparity between the belief of openness, equal opportunity, liberty, and justice for all, and the reality of mass incarceration, disenfranchisement, and dehumanization. That's really the critical divide that I see when I talk to young people of color. That when you ask them, do you experience, and this is a question that I posed recently, do you experience racial discrimination in your everyday life? And there's a pregnant pause. There's a sense of not being able to specifically and concretely articulate what racial discrimination looks like. But when you continue to unpack with them how, when they go to a liquor store, when they go to a convenience store, there are all these surveillance cameras. There are non-Black people that are looking askance at them, are scrutinizing them, in some instances, physically accosting them, before they leave the store. When you talk about how they traverse their communities and a police car rolls up on them and, descends and interrogates them about, having been in a location several miles away when the suspect in question looks absolutely nothing like them but happens to be a Black male. When you ask them, what is the configuration of your classroom? And this is in predominantly, Black and brown schools because, that's the predominant demographic of LAUSD. what's the configuration of your classrooms, particularly advanced placement and honors classrooms? And they say, well, the classrooms are physically divided between black and brown students, and this is a specific incident that a student conveyed to me recently, where the non-black teacher is saying, all the gifted students over here, and they of course happen to be Latino, and all of the underachieving students over there, and of course they happen to be African American. And so these are the realities that young people are experiencing, that they have at this point no outlet to talk about, to resist, and to deconstruct. That we, as those who are critically conscious of the lessons of the civil rights movement, need to be able to intervene in, and to mentor and to lift up these young people about. And I'm talking about not the 20-something millennials, but the teens, that are really suffering, the brunt of invisibility, when it comes to their course curricula, where they don't see, people of color, beyond slavery, and maybe some, extremely milquetoast domesticated version of civil rights that focuses, of course, on charismatic black male leaders, like MLK, and maybe, Rosa Parks, but not Rosa Parks contextualized in terms of her identity as a freedom fighter, dating back to the Scottsboro Boys trial. This is the kind of context that we're dealing with, in, this supposedly, multiracial, post-affirmative action, kind of milieu. So that is of critical importance to me if we're talking about what is humanism, moving into the 21st century, when millennials are going to be coming of age and running things. What does humanism look like? What is culturally responsive and culturally relevant humanism?
Excellent. And Jenn, would you like to be a part of this? Unmute yourself, Jenn. Can you hear me, Jenn? Okay, we can't hear Jenn, so I guess we'll move on to Donald. What would be your takeaway from this situation with the groundswell of protests?
Kim, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Who are you talking?
Yeah, I was talking to you, Donald. I was asking you what was your takeaway.
I didn't hear your last statement.
Okay. Oh, yeah. No, I was just talking about the takeaway from what's happening, and I was talking about challenging the media, divestment. That they feel. Tony says that the world should go South Africa on America, and sanctions, boycotts, divestment. We were talking about community policing, political organizing, so on and so forth. And I was just asking, what would be your takeaway from, what is happening now? What are some of the things that maybe we should focus on and try to make sure it's implemented?
Well, there's a few things that I think could be done, but my question to everyone is, what kind of world do we want to live? With the guys at the barbershop, there was I guess this young brother was about 5 or 6 years old in the chair next to me, and so my challenge to everyone in the barbershop was, what do you think he's going to be dealing with when he gets to be an adult? When he's in 20 years from now, what is he going to be dealing with? And I think that's the question that we have to try to answer. But one of the things that I struggle with here is there's not enough evaluation in terms of where the role that capitalism plays and how the American landscape is engulfed in the acquisition of wealth. So when you're trying to talk about various issues, most people are centered on their economic condition. And it's mostly from the attitude of, I'm trying to get mine and you get yours. But when you look at the overall scheme in terms of how the system operates, is that it doesn't work that easy. It's not, that's not how it's designed. And the ones that have it are just going to continue to get more. And you are going to be continually at the bottom of the pond, trying to eat the scraps. And if we're not going to encourage our or increase our understanding of just how this system operates, then we're going to be fighting losing battles, and there's only going to be certain things that we're going to see some progress in, and those are going to be minimum. So I suggested on my Facebook page that as I got criticism regarding the players from the Los Angeles Rams, the few players from the Rams that decided to show some support or use this opportunity to show support for the protesters. Well, I put out there, what about the possibility that all the black players did that? And what about the possibility of all the NFL, at this particular time, what about the possibility of all black players in the NFL and NBA choose not to play one game? And so the way in which I'm finding how little people know about our history, as you talk about the Montgomery bus boycott and the effect it had, but how long it took, and the things that people had to do in order to make that work. I just don't see particularly many black people going to want to go through that pain and have that type of persistence and perseverance in terms of boycotting. But doing things like that can be successful, I think, because I think the message is that this country only understands economic issues in terms of how relevant they need to respond. So I think the idea of trying to organize long-standing boycotts can be effective. So I support some sort of activity around that. But I am excited about talking about the millennials again in terms of where some of our leaders may come from at this point because of this. So I am excited about that because obviously we don't have any type of leaders that we can really be excited about, and I hope that those leaders come from from black comes from black secularists. I hope they come from our group. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Excellent, and I agree. And we've been ensconced in this type of, you know, politicizing for centuries, and that is one of the reasons why I'm a little disappointed with what I'm seeing. Jenn, did you want to add on to anything about what we would like to see or what we would like to take away from what's happening in the country now?
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Please.
good. I think that we need to really question and research where our dollars are going and start redirecting our money. I mean, I think that's really what we can do in the here and now. I've been having a lot of conversations with people about the protesting and things, and there's so many people that I speak to that are just against protesting. But when I challenge them and say, well, well, what would you rather see happen? What would you rather them do? I mean, other than protest? I just hear crickets. So, I mean, I think that this is what gets attention, the protesting, and where we spend our money. That's what's gonna make a difference. Um, I'd love to see more things added to it and more people involved, especially from the secular community. But I think the secular community silence speaks volumes. I know where I stand now within the secular community. I know that when I go to meetups, to meetings, to talks, to conferences, I know they see me as someone that they do not value and that they do not respect. And I'm going to respond in kind by not supporting those things anymore. You know, if they're not supporting us and people of color.
All right. What about Raina?
I didn't hear the question because I was disconnected.
Oh,
So,
okay. No, I was just talking about our takeaway from what's happening in the country now, and I was talking about some of the things that I would like to see us talk more about and to see to be a part of the conversation is discussion of our economic democracy, community control of the police, challenging the media, divestment, so on and so forth. And what is your take, or what would you like to take away from this situation?
what would I like to take away from this situation? Um, I mean, that's really hard. I don't really have a whole lot of faith in the system, so I don't know, what this is going to end up, doing. But I think it's important that we get out and that any type of resistance that we put forth is important, because the system really is built on people being complacent. So I think we have to be out there, and I think that the secular community, if it calls itself humanist, if it says it is interested at all in humanism, it must be out here participating too. Um, Otherwise, they're not humanists. You have to be interested in human lives in order to be a humanist. And right now, it doesn't look like the secular atheist humanist community is really interested in affirming that Black Lives Matter. And that's all I have to say about that.
Well, and I find that unfortunate, that statement that you don't believe that they are interested in black lives and that, black lives doesn't matter to them. Because if you're a humanist, you're looking for, the humanity to be seen in everybody, not just people that look like you. And so we're going to wind this down. I want to let everybody know that we will be having a conference next October, Moving Social Justice Part 2. It will be in Houston, Texas, and we've been talking about it since October, so we want you to save up your United Negro Conference funds. Get ready, because we're going to be announcing more information about that, but we want to make sure that you all know that it will be taking place next October in Houston, Texas. So I just wanted to share something that Hank Johnson, the Democratic representative from Georgia's 4th District, when he took the floor to the House to deliver a cry for simple justice and saying that it must resound in the halls of history as long as memory exists. And his words went this way, and it said, "Men and boys killed by police. I can't breathe. Impunity for the killers. No justice, no peace. I can't breathe. Militarized police met peaceful protesters on their knees. I can't breathe. Weapons of war, a show of force on our streets. I can't breathe. Disenfranchised youth driven to violence as speech. I can't breathe. Cynical media thinks that this makes great TV. I can't breathe. This cowardly Congress, afraid of losing our seats. I can't breathe. Half-hearted reform when there's more that we need. I can't breathe. Just thinking about the despair that this breeds. I can't breathe. Black Lives Matter, hear my pleas. I can't breathe. I can't breathe." So I just wanted to share that with you all, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us today and let you know how much we appreciate you, and we appreciate the motivation and support. If you want to reach out, our email address is peopleofcolorbeyondfaith@gmail.com. Again, that's peopleofcolorbeyondfaith@gmail.com. I will be tweeting out and posting more links about if you're interested in being engaged, where you can find protests in a city near you as well, and be a history, be on the right side of history. And so with that, we'll end this webcast. We look forward to coming back next January and with a new webcast. So be on the lookout. And while we're here, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you all have a lovely rest of the day now. Take care.
Bye.